word authoritarian or stern. I meant to change that one. But the guy threw on the intercom system and spoke then in a stern voice. You know, there's a little trick sort of involved with some of this that the news broadcasts and the attempted analyzation and etc. From one view, if you think about it a second, if we were saying that this had something to do with trying to think for oneself, that has got to be just the living end of an example of the ridiculous. To think in a certain way, wait a minute, you're going to listen to some kind of something, like listen to somebody tell you or encourage you, but to tell you how to think for yourself. Think about it for a second. I mean, that's got to... There's no fit description of how ridiculous that is at first blush. Wait a minute, you're going to go and watch a news show or listen to somebody analyze what they're calling, and the point is, in some way, to encourage you or to show you or to lead you to think for yourself. What else can you do besides kind of roll your eyes or go, Jesus? But there is a trick. In other words, if we just said the purpose of this was, anybody that was interested in this kind of stuff throughout history, their real interest was in, let's just put it for a second, quote, learning to think for themselves. Right out there in the street, right out there now and right out there 6,000 years ago and all the way from then until now, the streets, ordinary civilization, the sane ones of the world, are run by those that if you said, did you realize that probably the best thing a man could attempt to do or learn to do would be think for himself? The backbone of humanity would look at you like you were nuts. Forget saying, well, I have been even attempting to do it. If you just said, that sounds to me like what a man should do. The ordinary would, if they had to respond, if they would lower themselves to such a deranged level to respond to you, they'd go, well, what the hell do you think we're doing now? How do you think I got to be mayor? How do you think I got to be rich? How do you think I got my business going? How do you think I pulled myself up from the gutter, from poverty, and became somebody? How do you think that I got a PhD? How did I get to be an individual? What do you mean think for yourself? And they would just assume you're nuts. It is such a beautiful trick. There is no way, because now we got to ignore that because we'll assume that, well, you can assume anything you want to. I won't point out the obvious, because the obvious is always either they're crazy and you're all right, or there is an alternative. Since I was talking to you people instead of them, you notice which one I put first. Of course, if I was talking to them, I'd lay it on you. Well, those people are either crazy and we're okay, or the trick is this, assuming then that you are in the position, that you are taking the position that there is some other way to think that you haven't been doing, or that people don't normally do, and it has nothing to do with education or anything else normally available. The trick then is this. Then you would have some, at least nonverbal support, or you would be nonverbally supporting the idea that it is possible to learn to think for yourself in some way that you don't now, and perhaps in such a way to realize that, hey, I don't think for myself. The trick is, though, this. There's no way to just suddenly go boom, and you can think for yourself. The trick is this. If you don't know something about what's going on in life, then you can't think for yourself. If you don't know something about what's going on in life in a slightly different way than everyone else, then you can't think for yourself. But everyone else in life, they can think for themselves by their own admission. They know by and large. All you got to do is ask them what's going on in life. But if you do not have some new concept of the news, that is, stuff out there, if we're going to divide it, we've got your brain, that is, you thinking, and then we've got everything else out in life, everything that's not your thinking, just the ordinary world. If you don't know what's going on out there in some unusual, some new way, then you can't think anew. If what you know about the world is what everybody else knows, if all you think is common thoughts, then you can't think anew. That is, if what you think about everything as it is now is what everybody else thinks, right or wrong, yes or no, pro or con, then you can't think for yourself. If you're ordinary, of course, you say you do. And there's no one to say otherwise. So you see, the trick is, you can't start out in some way directly, try to think for yourself. Now, I'm doing this sequential. I'm going to wrap it up in a minute and try and strangle you with your own umbilical cord. See, that's a postnatal condition you can only do on a bed for bad luck and inside the house. You can't start out first and just suddenly think for yourself. Now, it would sound like maybe using my own descriptions that you would suddenly just simply think, all right, let's see, everybody else, take the matter of abortion, take the matter of religion, take any kind of matter that there is heated, passionate discussion, pro and con, and let's see, what have I always thought? I've always been kind of pro-abortion, or con-abortion. So let's see, I'll think for myself. Okay, what did I say I'd been? Con. All right, let's see, I'll think for myself. All right, no, wait a minute. There's a possibility here. I know what? I'll think pro. Does that look like the poster boy for Mr. Originality? I have always had, let's see, the matter of religion. Is religion really a drawback to the progress of intellectual civilization? Well, I've certainly always believed otherwise. So let's see. If I'm going to think for myself, to hell with that. I'll say it is. That's thinking for yourself. All the dramatics was for the fact that that is not thinking for yourself. So if you were just left with that, then, if you were falling into that, then you'd say, well, in that case, you cannot think for yourself, because to take any of those examples, it's got to be one or the other. And you made it sound sort of silly for a man to say, well, I'm going to think for myself. What'll I pick out? How about abortion? I've always been in favor of it. So let's see. If I'm going to think for myself, I'll be against it. Then you've got to be pretty witless, torpid, dunderheaded, pecker-brained, limited in your conscious awareness to accept that as, yes, I am now thinking for myself. So, if you don't know any further than that, then you would say, wait a minute, in that case, based on that, there is no such thing as thinking for yourself. But we're still assuming that you suspect, if you don't know for sure, that there is something else. So what would it be? All right, well, it's not those two. And it's not that either one of the two is right or wrong, but it can't be those two, because you've got to see that whatever you were thinking, just to think the opposite, is not thinking for yourself. That cannot be it. So what's it got to be? It's got to be something else. So then, if you don't have some new idea about what's going on out there, some fresh take on the news, it doesn't matter what, anything. But I'm including everything, of life itself. If you don't have some idea of what's going on out here that's extraordinary, not pro or con, which makes it extraordinary prima facie, if you know, all right. News item. The ordinary believe that if you point out something, you have an opinion about it. Because if they do, they do. I thought that'd do it for you. That verbally wraps up the parameters of ordinary thought. Or for those of you in Arkansas, parameters. The ordinary mind believes that if you point out something, you have an opinion about it. Because if they do, they do. Do I have to put in must? The ordinary minds believe that if you point out something, mention something, but point out something in the widest sense, you must have an opinion about it. Because if they do, They do. Why else would an ordinary mind take heed of anything? Why would an ordinary mind say, abortion? Did I hear something about God, religion? Did somebody say something about not just politics, but conservative politics? You get the gist. I don't have to do just dramatics. If you can think at all now, you know. It's just part of the efficiency, the energy conservation of ordinary thought, that an ordinary person's mind will not take note of anything unless it has a what? I opinionate, therefore I am. I believe that news item had something to do with Bert, but I didn't want to say the word. I'm sure Kant would roll over in his grave if he could afford one. For those of you who don't know, back during that period, they didn't bury people in Germany. They had such rigid opinions, they would just wait until the ground was a little thawed out and they drove them in. In fact, there's some reports that what he actually said was, I resist, therefore I am. But then somebody else says that it really went, I resist, therefore I am, you know what. Serious Anglo-Saxon of mind. The ordinary mind, just on the basis, the physical, scientific, strange basis of the conservation of energy, an ordinary mind, it's just a fact, you know this. An ordinary person's mind, your ordinary mind, will not comment on something, will not notice something, will not point out something even to yourself unless it has an interest in it. That's self-evident. Anything else would be a form of derangement. It'd be a form of wasting of energy if an ordinary man went, well, let's see, I'm going to sit down or I'm going to subscribe to the New England Transvestite Woodcarvers magazine because of the fact I've got no interest in Down East. I wouldn't know one end of a knife. I even hate to see little carvings, and I certainly do not cross-dress. Therefore, I will read this magazine faithfully and try and form some good, basic, defendable opinions. It's just ridiculous. From any ordinary view, whether you're interested in wood carving, pro or con, if you say, well, you got no interest in that, don't do it. You've got to have some. Even if somebody says, I'm going to take a course, I never liked mathematics, and therefore I'll take a course in mathematics to try and expand my mind. Well, you see, even that. The man said he had some reason. Well, I'd like is a mental exercise. But what if you got no reason? Why in the world are you reading that book? I don't know. Are you actually reading it or just kind of turning the... No, I'm reading it. I am stopping. I'm making notes and studying. What interest do you have in this subject? None. Push just a few lines further, that conversation, and you would have someone who would be a prime candidate for the big FF. The funny farm. It's not natural. The mind would not do it. The news item again. The ordinary minds believe that if you point out something, you have an opinion about it. Because when they do, they do. That is the mind's ordinary take on the news. That's why we started running this as, for one reason, as a news program and all these news items. It's not trying to obviously convey some sort of information about the world out there. Because the world's there. You don't need anybody to point it out to you. But you can't ever think for yourself if you take the news, if you take the world as it is now and think, well, I got some idea what's going on. You got your mind locked on the channel. You're going to watch the news until you die. Most of you are probably not even watching the news. You're watching the faux news programs, which is no better or no worse. In fact, nowadays they're probably better. Never mind. It has to do with another news item. That entertainment is projected by some people to become, very shortly, the world's largest industry. And in response to that, there was somebody in the news item before that went, what do they mean someday? They're just getting around to the correct naming of it. It's kind of a trick within a trick that you've got to be able to simultaneously, that's why I said I'd make it even worse because its name is sequential. You remember where we started, that I admitted and pointed out, leave someone else do it for you, that it's sort of ridiculous if we call the purpose of this trying to learn how to think for yourself. Even if at first you heard that, an ordinary person thought, well, that's a good idea. But wait a minute. I'm going to go somewhere and somebody's going to tell me in some way or teach me or direct me or encourage me in something in there to think for myself. That even makes unanswerable Zen questions look kind of straightforward and right out of Reader's Digest. You just think, well, that is patently ridiculous. But is it? And of course the answer is no. Why is the answer no? Well, it's either yes or no, and almost anybody will take no for an answer if you will just simply change it to yes. Now we're getting somewhere. Everyone will. You can't think for yourself. I'll make it quick since we don't have a lot of choice. You can't think for yourself unless you can think about ordinary life in a new way. And you can't think about ordinary life in a new way unless you can think for yourself. There is a balance, as always, even if you're trying to do something extraordinary. And that is part of the trickery within a trick, that you can't tell somebody directly, well, here's how to think for yourself. Because no matter what you tell them, it's like the ultimate, assuming you're healthy, living, walking tar baby. You punch somebody and they give. There was a news item also tonight, if I can quote it, that said, maybe the intro wasn't formed just correctly, but it was a description of thinking as it's normally done. Was what it amounted to, was a description. And it said that kind of ordinary thinking is like a house on stilts. And the only way it can withstand the continuing onslaught of water is by yielding. The actual houses that you see in the far east. It wasn't the end of it. The only way that they can withstand that and continue is to be able to yield in the face of the pressure of rising, falling, changing waters, while simultaneously declaring, I shall not bend. That is ordinary thought. You don't think for yourself. What do you mean I don't think for myself? Well, notice you just responded just exactly like I knew you would. Well, sure you can say that. Well, I just did. Yeah, but that doesn't prove anything. I can think for myself. I can agree with what you say or not. Well, do it. I just did. As long as you believe at an ordinary level that you understand whatever the subject is. When I say that you've got to understand life in a new way, forget about a man looking around and just saying, well, I understand everything in life. You know, that comes a little later. That comes when you buy the next tape. So we'll be covering that on my next seminar about how to understand everything. We're just now trying to deal maybe with specifics. So a subject comes up, whatever it is. Politics, as narrow, as wide as you want. Some area that you think you have some knowledge of, that you keep, the arts, popular culture, anything, and the subject comes up, and you will have support if you're ordinary. That you say, well, I know something about this area. And you could be credentialed. Try that one. You could be empowered. You could have a degree in the area, or you could be in the business. You could have other people around you say, well, the man must know something about it. But all you got to do is believe that you know something about it. And if you believe that you know something about it out there, then you do not have a fresh knowledge of it, and you cannot think for yourself. You may be an expert, and people may pay for your opinion in that area, but you're not thinking for yourself. So you're left with, if you can't look at some area in life, whatever it is that seems to catch your attention at that moment, or that you think, well, why am I always worried about this? Or why do I internally always respond in such a hostile manner when I hear certain words or certain items on the news? Unless you can look at that area anew, and reversing it, taking another position won't do it. You might as well be back to skating on Saturday night. If you can't look at that area in some new way, then you cannot think for yourself. And there's nobody, the idea that I went ahead and stated that's ridiculous in a sense, to say, well, somebody's going to help you think for yourself. That's true. Because whatever idea, whatever feeling intellectually you have about some area, if you suddenly say, well, you're right, I can't think for myself in this area, and I realize just trying to change my opinion, just to take the opposite position wouldn't do it, so how can I think for myself? Nobody can tell you. There is no answer to that. Because you're down to the point of saying, if an ordinary mind could do it, now you're down to the point of saying, well, I realize now that it's not either heads or tails, but what's my choice? And you can't tell an ordinary mind, because there's no other choice besides heads or tails in an ordinary mind. What are you going to tell it? An ordinary mind, you can say, well, you don't realize it, but every coin in this universe, in this reality, has at least 3 sides. It has more, but it has 3. And nobody can think that at the ordinary level. And so even if they got that far to say, well, I realize that if I take either position, it's not thinking for myself. So what would it be? And you say something else. An ordinary mind can't do anything with it. So if that is the basis, if you could drag your ordinary mind or anybody's up to that point, and they would admit, well, I can't think for myself, and then if you tried to point out, well, here, if they get to the point of asking directly, well, if it's not either A or B, this or that, up or down, then what is it? And you said, all right, it's a third one. You're right. It's neither one of the two. It's another one. Of course, then you're faced with, wait a minute, if I could think that, I could, yes, I could. How about think for myself? So, my original observation that, in a sense, this is ridiculous if you put it on the basis of, so we're going to learn to think for ourselves. Let me get my notebook. Wait a minute. Take some notes here. Nobody can tell you. Well, Jesus, have I been tricked? I don't know. Can a man be tricked into thinking for himself? I don't know. You want to try? Wait a minute. That doesn't have anything to do with all this kind of phony baloney made up news, does it? That seems to go on and on and on, and then sideways and then backwards. Wait a minute. Nobody's going to make a fool out of me. Hey, the man said it right. It was read on the news twice this week. The man said, nobody makes a fool out of me. And it was only 2 nights later, if I remember correctly, the man repeated it. I mean, he had time to reconsider. He had a good 48 hours, and he restated his position. He said, well, he allowed himself to be quoted right here. He said, nobody is going to make a fool out of me. Now there you are. I mean, I don't want anyone to ever fear that you will be tricked into thinking for yourself. Because nobody. Also, the second time he said that he felt as though, or he felt certain he was speaking for many others. He said that nobody is going to make a fool out of me. Now, as long as you can hold that kind of position, you're safe. They will not take you away. They will not take away your shoestrings. You will have the comfort of friends and family. You'll know always where you stand. Of course, don't be like the news item of a man who will sit for an interview. Don't let them interview you just because you're sane, and don't ever sit for an interview. As long as you will not bother, as long as you will not struggle in any way, even if you knew how, to think for yourself, then no one can make a fool out of you. There have been many news items of late in support of that. That is not my opinion, as simple and crude as it may be, because the dumb always have options. The dumb, the dense are always forgiven, even though they're made to believe that they never are. The dumb are never stuck for an answer. The collective are always correct. I'm just pulling out as many as I can. Right from the news now. This is not stuff I made up. This is from the news I made up. I mean, they read it here at the desk. That as long as you can do that, then there's no danger of you having to even wrestle with the question of, wait a minute, is it possible I do think for myself? Or is it possible I don't? Is that what it is? Is it possible that I really don't? No. Not unless you're going, don't let anybody make a fool out of you. I guess we can leave it at that. It's always nice to have words to drive home by. Don't let anybody make a fool out of you.